of training before I went into it. And before that, I worked in a bakery. It was Robinson's Bakery, and I was in sweet doughs. There was a Mr. Kidd, a friend of my dad's, and he worked there, and so he got me on in the bakery, and I worked with him. And I mostly washed pans to start with. Big cake pans about this long and about that wide, and they weren't deep. They were only about so deep. And I washed pans to start with, and then from there I helped to mix the doughs and things of that sort. I worked at that until the war came on, and
in 19...
that would be, when would that be? I think 1940. So 40, that would make me what?
When were you born?
Had to be before that. I was born in 1920.
18.
It would be 18. Well, then it was 1939.
That the war started.
Yeah.
Second World War.
Well, I don't know. That's when I was working in the bakery anyway. And then that's right. And then I went into youth training at 17. And that would be 1939. And I went into training, and I was in training for a year, and I joined the forces, and it seems to me it was July the 29th, 1941, when I joined the forces.
Did you expect?
So if you joined, well, then you could choose what you wanted to. Of course, you had to have an educational to be able to go into the Air Force or a specific trade in the Navy, but this isn't going to sound so good, but it's the truth that those that went into the Army were the Air Force or the Navy. I always made good marks. I always made good marks all the way through. Always it was in the 80s or 85, and between 80 and 90. And on all my exams, even when I was flying as a flight engineer, I took courses on that. But I studied hard. I had to study hard because, Skinner, he was with us when, and he had a photographic memory. He just read a thing and he had it right now, but I had to work for everything I got. But in youth training, I remember there was a fellow that was part Chinese, and he was really tall, and he was our instructor on engines. And I remember that we had to learn to file, and we filed a piece of a block, and we had to file it in certain shapes and to specific measurements, and within thousandths we had to use a micrometer to check it, and it was that smooth that you could take it and rub it on a piece of glass, and it would you could lift the glass. So we learned that, and I remember one had a fellow, I can't remember his name, but we were always playing jokes on one another, and we had him looking for a skyhook. Yeah. We needed a skyhook so we could lift this engine. Week looking for a skyhook. Anyway, yeah, crazy things that happen. But it's crazy, young people, young. It's nice to be young. But anyway, we learned the four-stroke principle was intake, combustion, power, and exhaust was what they drummed into us. Intake, compression, power, and exhaust. So you had the intake stroke and the compression stroke and the ignition or power, and then the exhaust stroke. Whereas with a 2-second you only have the two.
But you can't even fix your dryer.
Yeah, that's a shame. But the thing that I remember the most in that youth training was running up aircraft engines. They had a test house, and your engines, you were inside with the controls, and your engines were outside, and you had to run up the engine and make the checks you would do. You would check your cylinder head temperature, and you'd check your revolutions per minute, and you would check your magnetos. And on a magneto, I think we were allowed 50 to a 75 drop. So you'd switch off one magneto and your RPMs would drop down 50 to 75 RPM, and then you'd flick it back on, and then you'd check the other one, and flick it off and flick it back on. And you'd get a drop of 75, and then your RPMs would come back up again. And I think that's the thing that I thrilled the most of there. And I remember when we had joined the forces then, I should maybe mention when we went in for our medicals, we had to be weighed and measured and all the rest of it, you know. And I only weighed 129 pounds, I think it was. And the sergeant that was weighed me, he said, "Oh, a little bugger, eh?" I said, "Well, I might be little, but I'm wiry. I'll take you on any day." And so he got quite a kick out of that. And so we passed our medicals, and then we were, I don't think we were given, no, we weren't given uniforms then. We weren't given uniforms until we got, what do they call it? Training depot, anyway. And we marched down Granville Street. Group went. One of the large groups that left, that was 41, and marched down Granville Street with marker. So my job, keep in a street, and then the others spaced themselves from me over. And I was so concentrated on that position that my mother was running down the sidewalk beside it, and I never knew she was there. We marched down Hastings and into the train depot there, and then we were dismissed. And then that's when I got to see Mother and Dad, and I think my sisters were there as well, and said goodbye to them. And that's when I found out that Mother had been running down the sidewalk trying to get my... It wasn't quite a thing for a mother, you know, to have her oldest son leaving to go to war. It must have been quite a thing. And we got on the trains and went to Edmonton, or Penhall. That's where we got off in Penhall. Oh yes, I remember that. We came to a siding, we were shunted off, and we had to wait for a locomotive to come and hook onto us and take us into Penhall. I guess we were off to one side, I don't know. But we waited there for a long time, and they were all of them getting pretty snarly about having to wait so long. The conductor kept coming through and telling us that we wouldn't be very much longer now. And then when we got to Penhall, we wouldn't get off the train. And they had to send the service police, SPs, service police on board to get us off the train. And I guess that's where, you know, it was such a big group of men that I guess that's why it was that way. But we got into Penhall, and that's where they really drilled us. Of course, Blondell wasn't there. That was the one I was telling you about before that was in Edmonton. But they drilled you when you went on parade. You stood to attention, and it was so hot on the tarmac that guys would pass out. And when we went to march off, we just had to turn and step over them. They never moved them at that time. But later, when we got into Edmonton, and guys passed out on parade. Well, they would allow the guy beside him or one on each side of him to take him off. And of course, a lot of them passed out. Really pass out, they'd just fall down and the two would take them away. But they got a little more humane and would allow you to take a man off the parade square. The biggest problem there was on parade for people passing out was that they stood too rigid, and they told us afterwards that when you stand, you stand with your feet together, but when you're standing at attention, you would just lift one heel, just lift that heel just a little bit like that, you see. And then when the circulation got through there, then you'd put that heel down, then you'd lift this heel just so that no one would see you moving. You had to keep your thumbs like that. And when you marched, your arms are straight, and you brought them straight up. And they brought them right up shoulder high when you were marching. Well, that's what I was telling you then, that we went from Penhole to Edmonton and we run into this Blondell guy, and boy, he was really mean.
Big, mean, and ugly, huh?
Oh boy, he really was, yeah. Yeah. But we, like I said, we put these balaclavas on and met him in the dark one night and beat the can out of him. He was
Teaching your grandchildren, goodness.
What's that?
You
Can't
don't
get
like
along
him.
with somebody
You
beat
kept putting him in the dark.
No. Yeah. Well, that's in wartime. Yeah. You know, in the First World War, Uncle Wesley, we called him, that would be my mother's brother, was thrown off the train for something he said, and that's the way men are in the forces, and in the time of war, they have no respect for nothing. And he just made some foolish remark, and they just grabbed him and threw him right off the train. He could have killed him. There's lots of people in the First World War, officers and NCOs of this type that we were watching tonight, that were shot by their own men because of the way they were. We had an officer beside this Blondell that got the same treatment in Edmonton, and he was they used to make you do R11, is what the Navy called it, and you had to hold your rifle above your head and with a pack sack on your back and run around the parade square with a rifle above your head, and they'd run you until they dropped. I never got that, but well, we were there for 4 months in Manning Depot is what they call it, Manning Depot. And you come into this and you learned that. Now we wouldn't have been there that long, only there was an epidemic of polio in the east, and we couldn't move. But after that, I was transferred to
You couldn't move.
St. Thomas, Ontario. No, it wasn't. It was didn't go to Vancouver Island. And that's where the Japs hit. They were Pacific there, and I remember that.
Good way home.
I guess that's where it was. But we were on the alert there. We had Hudson bombers, big Hudsons. They were, yeah, in turret on the top. I think they were turret on the bottom, and a bomb aimer's point in the front. We had Bolingbroke's, which was another bomber. I think it was an English bomber. And we had Cessna Crane aircraft for trainers for twin engine. We had Kitty Hawks that come in there, first time that they had them. And they, Kitty Hawks were really hot. The pilots weren't used to them, and they'd prang them one right after another. they'd come in too fast and too hot and hit the tarmac and take off the undercarriage and bend up the prop, and we were always hauling them things off the runway until they got used to it. We had them one stall, I guess, and went into a spin in the stall and went right into the bay, and it just the blocks, cylinder blocks, right off as if somebody had taken a hacksaw and sawed them right off. And that we had Stranners, which was a big bi-wing or flying boat. It didn't have wheels, so they used to have to put dollies underneath them and winch them up out of the water on the ramp. And they had Cansos that they had to do the same. And then they got it was a Catalina that didn't have the wheels, and the Canso had. It was amphibious. It could land in the water and taxi up the ramp. What else did we do in there? I remember that I went for my first aircraft ride, and I was really all excited about it, I had gone to the flight sergeant and asked him if I could go for a ride, and he said, when they start running up that Hudson, you let me know and you can go. So I waited what seemed hours and hours for this doggone aircraft to get started. They finally started it, so I went to him and I said, they got that aircraft started, and he said, so what? And I said, well, you said I could go. Well, you're not going, in plainer language. And I called him everything under the sun, and for insubordination of speaking that way to a flight sergeant, I was put in the kitchen. I had to work in the kitchen for a month, washing pots and pans and every dirty job they could find, And it was at that time that the Japs started in. And we slept in barracks, and there was double bunks or bunk beds, one beside the other. And we had always been issued with rifles and ammunition, and we had those beside our bed. And when the Japs started, we had to sleep in full dress uniform, and our rifles beside us at all times. And if there was an alarm, then you were right there to grab your guns and go. You had to go to the hangars and defend the hangars. That's what we were supposed to do. And then after a month or so, things relaxed, and we were allowed to undress to go to bed, but we still had our rifles beside us. And this guy was doing an inspection on the Hudson in the hangar. He was an armament, and he tripped the machine guns and shot bullet holes all through the side of the hangar. And when they heard them going off, they thought something was up, and the siren went, and we had to jump out of bed, dress, and be down to the hangar. And I never saw guys get out of bed and get dressed so fast in all my life. Man, that was something. We were scared stiff.
And what were the Japanese supposedly doing?
Well, they had submarines out on the coast, and they had spotted them. We had patrols that went out. The Hudsons went out in patrols to patrol the coast to watch for things like that, and they had spotted Japanese submarines and dropped bombs on them, but I can't remember now whether they sank any or not. But and I can't remember what the scare was, whether it was when they hit Pearl Harbor. What year was that? Do you remember? What year they hit Pearl Harbor?
December 7th, 1941
41, 42?
or 42.
42, I guess it was. Well, that's what it was. It must have been there. Well, finally, we got transferred out of Pat Bay to St. Thomas, Ontario, where we took more engine training. We were there for another 4 months. St. Thomas, Ontario was where we went. The barracks that we lived in was an old mental institute. They had bars at the windows and things of that sort. We were in the 98th entry, and the 100th entry was going overseas. So we tried to get put back into the 100th entry, and there was, in the spark plug room, carbon tetrachloride was a cleaning fluid that they put the spark plugs in, and it took all the carbon off them, you know. And if you got a few whiffs of that, it would make you sick. So we tried to get sick by taking this stuff. But they caught on to us in the hospital, and they wouldn't. We were trying to get sick enough so that they would put us back another entry, and then we were trying to get put back into the 100th entry, so we'd have to go back 2 entries. But they caught on to us, and they just told us that we weren't going to make it. We had big parades there too, and we had route marches where we marched for miles with bands. And, it was fun. In Edmonton, we marched route marches too. Yeah. We used to march from the exhibition grounds across to the airport and back. I think it was 14 miles. I don't know if it was 14 miles one way or 14 miles return. I can't remember. And you marched at attention, and you marched at ease. And I always used to try and get in the tail end of the flight. They called them flights. Number 1 flight, number 2 flight, number 3 flight, and so many flights made a squadron. And at the end, hop, step, teasing, you know. There'd be crowds of people along the streets watching and waving at you, and you could, when you're at ease, you could marching at ease, you could, pretty well do anything but speak. You couldn't shout at them; they'd shout at you, but you couldn't shout at them and wave at them. Of course, if you're at the back of the flight, where the flight commander up in front couldn't see, you had more fun. St. Thomas, Ontario. Well, we graduated out of there, and from there I got a posting, and I had put in for Vancouver or Vancouver Island. You could put in for a preference posting. My posting come out, I forget where I was, but somebody come and told me, or I phoned in or something, and they told me that I had a posting to McDonald, Manitoba. I said, where on earth is McDonald, Manitoba? Well, that's in Winnipeg, or in close to Winnipeg. Well, that isn't a western posting. That's what I asked for, was a western posting. Well, that's west as far as we're concerned. Well, I went to McDonald, Manitoba, and that's where I met your mother. I'd only been there about 3 days, I guess, and I finally got a weekend pass to go into Portage la Prairie. It was 7 miles west and 7 miles north of Portage la Prairie. And Portage la Prairie was the big town. Well, it was supposed to be 15,000, I think.
Yeah.
But that wasn't just the city alone. They took in all the area around, I think, as well, to make that up. But it was quite a big place. And we went into town this night, and there was a dance at some arena. And there was Dima. Dima played the piano, and I don't know whether there was an orchestra. I think there was an orchestra, but she played the piano. And you could buy tickets. They were 10 cents a ticket. and buy a whole bunch of tickets, and then you'd just ask a girl if she wanted to dance, and before you went on the dance floor, you'd have to give a ticket. So then you'd have a dance and come around and then come off, and then the next dance you'd take somebody else, and I danced with your mum, and well, we walked home. Walked her home after this. She had a girlfriend, Ethel. Can't think of her last name. Ethel. She married a fellow by the name of Coates. I don't know what her name was before. Her mother would know. We walked her home, and then they did all kinds of crazy things in there too, you know. Like we had WAC, W-A-C, Women's Air Corps, I guess it was, and they were billeted in McDonald as well. And it worked both ways at different times. A guy was, the WACs were marching by, all prim and proper, and you know, and I think there was 2 flights of them, and they were marching by our barracks, and the guy got shoved out the door with nothing on. God, see what a commotion it would make. And then it worked in reverse too. I remember I was marching by the women's barracks, and the women been shoved out the door with nothing on. What a hullabaloo that come of that. They had to do some hollering to keep them there, I guess, in the straight line. Anyway, that was some of the fun things that happened there, and I told you about this ferry battles is what they were training on. It was a gunner, they call it a gunnery school, that's all. Number 3, B&G, bombing and gunnery, that's what it was. Number 3, B&G, bombing and gunnery. And so these ferry battles they had Rolls-Royce inline, well, they were, what were they? I don't know how many, I think it was V12.
Hmm?
Yeah, V12, I think. They were big engines. Like I said, the prop was 450 pounds and 12 foot 6 inches, or 14 feet 6 inches in diameter. And I remember one guy there in the stores when I was working on these props for balancing them. The root for the twist on the blade had to have so many pounds torque, 40 pounds torque loading on that blade for turning, you see. And I went into this guy in the stores and said, I need 40 pounds of torque. Torque. Yeah, I needed 40 pounds, and I need it as soon as I can get it. And he said, I don't know whether I've got any, but I'll check. And so he was a week looking for 40 pounds of torque. And that guy, I met him after the war in Vancouver. Just a coincidence, you know. He was walking down Hastings going one way, and I was walking going the other way. And we met. And he never said, oh, hi, Fred. He said, you and your 40 pounds of torque. That's the first thing that comes to his mind. You and your 40 pounds of torque. And I hadn't seen him for years, you know. I can't even remember his name. We had a lot of groups go out of McDonald, Manitoba to go overseas. But I always seemed to miss it. They'd call a muster parade, and I was either on a pass or somewhere down the line checking an aircraft or something like this. We used to run up our aircraft there and test them before the pilots went. And I was in maintenance there as well. I wasn't in the flights. I didn't work in the flights at all, only to go down to a flight and check an aircraft for its propeller. If they'd have
And
trouble.
what's a muster?
Muster parade, well, I couldn't tell you except that they would call everybody that was there on parade now.
Yeah.
It wasn't a formal parade, in other words. It was a parade that was called right now, with those people that were there and come to that.
And then what did you do?
Well, I don't know, I wasn't on them.
Oh.
They would pick out so many men. Well, they'd say, for instance, they would say, from here to the right will be going overseas. And from here to the right, attention, right turn, and dismiss to your barracks to get your belongings. You'll be leaving at such and such a time, sort of thing.
Hmm.
And then from McDonald, I was transferred from McDonald to Vancouver, and Mother and I were married. I guess Wes was born in Vancouver. I don't know how long we've been married. We were married on the 1st of June, and we were transferred to Vancouver anyway. We went by train to Vancouver. And I remember on the train, Mother was upset because the waiter had set down a teapot, I think, for me, and said, he set it down here, and I picked it up and set it over there, and he picked it up and set it back, and it upset Mother, and she got up and run away from the table and cried. In Vancouver, I was on Canso aircraft and Lancasters. It was a boat school, really, for the Cansos were amphibious, and you gonna make it?
No, they aren't.
No, you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should just shut up and go.
It's only
11:15. Well, we flew as engineers there. They call them crewmen there, but you did the same thing as an engineer.
Yeah.
There was the Canso had a high wing, and the engineers sat underneath the wing, the support of the wing.
pedestal.
Yeah, pedestal of the wing there, and there was a window on each side that you could look out. And in front of you, you had all your engine instruments, and the pilot would call for what he wanted. You started the engine, did you? No, you gave him the mixtures that he wanted. Rich mixture for starting, you see. And you did the priming of the engine and all that. And when it was ready, you would. And it was all done by lights. There was a whole set of lights all across, 2 sets of lights. And he would flick a switch up in the cockpit, and it would say, put a light on it in yours, and it would say rich mixture or cruise or so on, you see. And you set the prop pitch as well. And he had the throttles, and he would start the engine, but you gave him all the things that you wanted. You put the wheels down, you put the floats down, and all that, and all by the signal there. So you just sat there. There was only just room. It wouldn't be any wider than this chair right here. You just sit there, and you had an armrest on either side, and you had a ladder that you climbed up and down. It was built right into the wall, more or less. And you could climb up that and sit up there, and you had your earphones on. And you could speak back and forth to the pilot.
Do you have a window?
Yeah, to look out. And boy, when them guys learn them things and they're learning, they'd drop it in from 15 feet, and she'd just bounce.
Belly flop it.
Bounce. And they'd get bouncing so that they'd crack the throttles wide open again, and they would be full rich for takeoff, So you'd slap her into full rich, and away they go. Take off, and try it again. Bang, bang, bang. Then you had to learn to tie up to buoys on the water, catch a buoy with a hook. A buoy You know what a buoy is, eh? It's a float thing with a,
Yep.
yeah. And we had a guy there, a corporal that used to think he was, his name was McDonald. Mac. We used to call him Mac, but his name was McDonald. And we used to come up to this, these boys, and he used to figure that he was the top-notch guy on this thing, you see. And we had a great thrill with him one day. He got the rope behind him, and he caught the boy, and of course when the aircraft went by, the rope tightened up and he went boing
Right out into the water.
into the drink. And he sure pulled his horns in for a while after that. That's another place where I used to, the hangar was really high. The cancel had a real high tail, you know. And one place, the offices and whatnot were way up on this balcony sort of thing. You went upstairs, it went in, out of the hangar, and or off to one side and up two flights of stairs to get up. And all the way along was about a 4x4 rail. And I used to get my pop for nothing, because they'd say, "Come on, Fred, you walk along there and we'll buy you a pop." So I'd hop up on the rail and walk along, look down here. It must have been, oh, I don't know, 20 or 25 feet up, I don't know. I got a lot of free pop by that. It was there that I designed a wheel dolly for the Lancaster. Lancaster wheel was 5 feet, I think, 5 feet in diameter. And I don't know, it must have been that wide, you know. Weighed over 500 pounds. And these guys would have to take a wheel off a Lancaster and wheel it in. And there'd be about 3 guys on each side of this thing trying to wheel it in. And it was tilting this way and that. And so I thought, boy, there ought to be a better way than that. So I designed a wheel dolly that they could, how'd that darn thing go? They slipped it in this way, go right in under the wheel on either side. There was a stand up here and a latch here so that the axle would fit into that latch, and it was 3 wheels. I think I had 2 wheels at the back and I had 2 wheels at the front. And then there was a carriage affair that the wheel would sit on, and a jack, so they could jack that up and it would catch the wheel. It had, at the back, it had 2 kind of arms come out, back and front, so that the wheel would be cradled in that and also cradled in this thing at the bottom. And I also had it designed so that the wheels could be, you could swivel them. They were swiveling wheels so they could move the thing anyway, and so you could push it in this sideways, or you could, and then when you pulled it, I had it so that one wheel at the back locked, and so that made it track in a straight line. And I took that up to the engineering officer, and he was going to have it built, you know. And it was there for, I was in the machine shop at the time, and it was there for a month or so, you know, and I kept saying, has there anything been done on that wheel dolly? And he kept saying, well, yes, it's coming along, you know. And finally, I think about 4 months or so later, I happened to be across the field at Trans-Canada Airlines, which is Air Canada now, and here's my wheel dolly. The cotton picker had taken the pattern and sold it to Trans-Canada Airlines. I couldn't do a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I got beat on that another time too, on a thing that I had done for the T-33s. I don't know whether I ever told you about that. Those air casings used to split. There's a jet engine, and number 3 and number 5 on the bottom. There was one in between, but these 2 outside ones used to split all the time, the air casing. Now, inside the air casing is a flame tube. It's a tube that's got a whole bunch of holes in it, and the gas is pass down through that, and the flame goes on either side. And the air casing was a flow of air that used to flow between the flame tube and the air casing to keep it cool enough that it wouldn't burn it out, you see.
Yeah.
And these would split. So on the flame tubes there was what would you call it, a strengthening band that was put around every so far, because what caused them problems was that they would pulsate with the gases going through at such a tremendous speed and temperature. They would pulsate, and that would crack an air casing. So they put strengthening bands around the air casings, you see, every so far, so that this thing wouldn't pulsate so much. It wouldn't have that much to pulsate. But here was the air casing on the outside that had the whole thing. It would be about that long. That would pulsate, and so it would split. So I put in an unsatisfactory condition report. I was in charge of the engine bay at the time, and suggested in this thing that they put strengthening bands around the outside of the air casings, the same as they had on the flame tube. And I put it in, and never heard anything about it for about 3 months or more. One day the Rolls-Royce rep, we had a representative in the hangar that was from Rolls-Royce. He come over to the engine bay and he said, "Hey Fred, we got a fix on that air casing business. And we just got I don't know what to call it, a memorandum in from Rolls-Royce." And Rolls-Royce had suggested that air strengthening bands be put around every so far. I said, "Hey, that's my idea." And I never got a cent for it, and never got. It had gone through and been sidetracked off, you know.
Yeah.
And beat me out of that. And that's where I did a lot of flying, as I was saying before, that I was in charge of the engine bay, and also from the engine bay I became in charge of maintenance research. All these unsatisfactory condition reports came into my office, and I had, I think, a staff of about 10. And we all went through these unsatisfactory condition reports and made files of them, and then we acted as a group to try and correct the problems that they were having. And I think before that I was before I was in charge of the engine bay, and before I was in charge of maintenance research, I was instructing on the Mean 10 engine in I forget what they called it. It was a school, a special school, and all the pilots in training had to go through this school. School of Instruction. Yes, STS was what it was. That was the name, SSTS, but I can't remember what it stood for. Training school. Can't remember. Anyway, it was. I was there for about 3 years, training on engines. I trained on all types. I trained mechanics on radial engines and inline engines and inverted engines and you name it.
Mm-hmm.
I instructed them on those. And I was there, like I say, for 3 years. I remember one time giving the turbine clearances on the Mean 10. There was a Mean 10 engine in the T-33 jet engine, centrifugal type. The clearances were 20 thou on the top, 40 thou on the side, and 60 thou, no, it was the other way around. It was 60 thou on the top, 40 thou on the side, and 20 thou on the bottom. And this was because when it heated up, it would sag, so that the top would come down and the sides would come in and the bottom would go down. And so you had pretty well, I don't know, 40 thou, I suppose, pretty well 40 thou all the way around.
Yeah.
And I was teaching a Norwegian class, and there was a Norwegian put his hand up and said, "What do you mean this thou?" So I wrote out on the blackboard 1,000, and about that long, you know. And I said, over here in Canada we're lazy, so we leave off the sand. So I rubbed it off, and that left thou. He said, "Oh, you mean Tusen." Did I ever tell you that story before? Yeah, I said 60 Tusen on the top, 40 Tusen on the side, and 20 Tusen on the bottom. And I used to tell another story. There was a selenium rectifier. It's what converts DC to AC and has a very high voltage. It was so high that it was lethal, and it was what gave the ignition to the engine. There was 3 igniter plugs, they called them. There was one in number 5, one in number 3, and one in number 6, I think, at the bottom. And then they were interconnected. There was flame tubes, well, the flame tubes, but there was interconnectors between the combustion chambers, and the gases then would spread around them. And this selenium rectifier was lethal up to 3 minutes after it had been ignited, you know. And so we had to impress on them that they were not to touch any of that. The mechanics were not to touch any of that system until at least 3 minutes after. And to impress them on it, I told them the story about Johnny, who was late for school. And his teacher said, "Johnny, how come you're late for school?" And he said, "Well, I saw a fella get hit in the ass with a truck." She said, "Johnny, you mean wrecked him." He said, "Wrecked him, hell, it killed him." That's the story I used to tell him. But I think that I've told you enough for one night, because we're all going to sleep, and it's time, it's, what, 11:30, so we better wrap it up. And,
Well, you can
to the hospital. I missed part of it, didn't I?
Yeah.
We weren't very rich. And when my saw me, she was taken to the hospital. Yeah. What on earth does that do, Doc?
This?
Yeah.
That's a little television. I can see it.
Oh. Well,
Cute
you
baby.
know, I guess we were, I said we would, and I told you now, and I was in, I was SSTS in Portage la Prairie, wasn't it? And I think I missed a whole lot of, I jumped around quite a bit, I think. Anyway, it was in Portage la Prairie that I met your mom. Or did I tell you that on that tape too? Huh?
A little bit.
We're going over.
Um,
Who's knocking? Put it in your mouth. Who's knocking, Grandma?
I don't know where it started.
I didn't hear anyone, sweetheart.
Really?
Maybe your mom was in the
We went
room.
to, I don't know, did I tell you about training and my training? And yeah, I did it in school. And then did I tell you about, that was in Vancouver. And I went to St. Thomas, so yes, I told you about St. Thomas. And
Here, put
then
this in your
St.
mouth.
Thomas went to Portage la
Bite
Prairie,
your
and I
ear.
met Mother.
Put it in your bite ear. What is bite your
Did I
ear?
tell you about Mother?
Who
In
does
Portage la Prairie.
that round wheel?
In that last
Yeah.
thing there. Yeah, I think I did, didn't I? Didn't I tell you about the train and going on our honeymoon to,
Oh, yeah.
to Vancouver? And
Peter Cole.
and we were in Portage, back to McDonald, Manitoba, and we were there, what, how long were we in Manitoba? We went to, we were married, and we
6
were
months.
transferred out to
In November.
6 months. Then we went to Vancouver, and we were in Vancouver for 6.5 years.
Great.
Yeah, and I don't know whether I told you in that last one or not about, that's where Wes and Jim and Myrna were born in Vancouver. Did I tell you that? Oh. Well, let's see now. We went to Vancouver.
And you went up north from Vancouver and you were on search and rescue in Vancouver?
Yeah, I was on search and rescue.
And
I was a famous hero in Vancouver's on search and rescue.
Well, tell us that story. We never heard that story.
Well, there was a couple lost. Their name was Bill Grant and Sheila Cure. And Sheila was from here, from Cardston. Her folks
Oh, yeah.
lived here. No, they don't. They did.
Oh, yeah, right.
Lived here till he died.
Yeah. But she was a nurse in Vancouver. And Bill Grant, I think he was with the City Hall or something like that, wasn't he?
Well, he had a private plane
Yeah,
anyway.
he had a private plane, and he flew her back home here to Cardston to visit her folks. And then on the way back, they had to be back, well, I guess the next day sort of thing. And Bill Grant was told not to take off because the weather was bad over the mountains. But I guess for them having to be back, he was going to go anyway, so he went. And around Hope in the Fraser Valley, went into the side of a mountain. Apparently it was clouded over and the clouds cleared, and the peak of this mountain, Mount Sheem was the name of it. He moved up and he pulled up on the stick to try and get up over it, and stalled and mushed into it. I guess if he had lifted up, he would have fallen right into it, and they would have smashed. But with them seeing it and him pulling up to try and get over it, they just stalled and mushed it, and so they were all right that way. But we looked for them for, I think it was 10 days before. There was a thing there too that might be interesting to tell, and that was that Howard Lane was stationed in Vancouver at the same time. And there was a fellow by the name of Livingston. Do you remember his first name? Yeah, Livingston.
Not really.
Yeah. I can't think of his first name, Livingston anyway. But on one of these, well actually it was the search when we found them. I was on a Lancaster. Howard Lane was on the Lancaster too. I was the engineer on the Lancaster, and Howard Lane was on as a spotter. And when they found out that we were both on that Lancaster, they said, we're not going to have two Mormons on one aircraft. We're going to have one on this one, and you will go over and take over the Canso. And it was the Livingston fellow was supposed to be on the Canso, but he was late. I don't know how come he was late, but he was late. And so I had got the Lancaster started, and they took me off of it and put me on this Canso. And we took off, and because we were late, the Canso was late. The rest of the aircraft got away all right, but because the Canso was late, they redirected us to an area that had already been covered. But it was quite bad weather when it hadn't been covered. And so we went out to this area and covered it again. And it was while we were on that. Now I had started out up in the tower, or in the engineer's position. I'd started the aircraft and taxied out and flown out and was up in the tower. Oh, I don't know, I guess it must have been an hour or more. And we had another engineer on board, and we traded off. So this fellow come up and took over my position, and I went back to the back. And on a Canso, there's big blisters on either side. And these was what we were watching out of. Well, I got the binoculars, and on a search, we always started at the bottom of a mountain and went up to the top, and then we'd go over and then come down, and we'd just work along a mountain up and down like that all the way. Well, I think I made 3 passes. I went up the mountain and down and up And there they were, sitting right there. The aircraft was sitting right there in front of me. Man, I had no communication with the pilot with earphones or being able to talk to him, so I dropped the binoculars and I ran up to the front of the aircraft and said I spotted them. I saw them. And by this time, of course, we'd gone quite a ways by. And so we circled back, and we circled around for quite a little while before we spotted them again. And then the pilot that I was with was green on cansos, and he was afraid to get down close to the mountains because of updrafts and downdrafts. He didn't know how they would affect the aircraft. So we called another aircraft in with a more experienced pilot on board. And while we were waiting for this pilot to come in, we circled and just kept circling around. Although the couple down below, that's Bill Grant and Sheila Cure down below, heard the aircraft, of course. We couldn't see anything of them, but they built a fire, and the smoke come up, and then that spotted them. The other aircraft came in, and when he came in, he went just right straight down over the top of them and back up, in the valley. And that let them know then that we knew that they were there and everything was all right. And so then we called in the Lancaster, and we had pararescue men on board. They jumped into the area. Well, they jumped in and got to the Bill and Sheila, and then they hiked out. I don't know how far. It seems to me it was around 10 miles they had to hike. And they had been in the bush 10 days and they had nothing to eat except one chocolate bar, and they were getting quite weak. Bill said that it took all his effort to get down to the creek and get water for them to come back up. And they got out to a lumber camp. And
Funny part of it was she washed her hair up there.
I don't remember that.
Yes, I do. She washed her hair in that soft mountain water made from snow.
I didn't know that.
Yeah?
Yeah. They started an avalanche, and they rode an avalanche down. The aircraft mushing in, I guess, shook it up enough that when they tried to go down, they started the snow to slide, and they slid along the top of the snow, getting down the side of the mountain. And they had a press conference at the airport, and I was introduced to them. And Sheila was a Mormon, and when I was introduced to her as leading aircraftsman Hillyer, and I leaned over and whispered into her ear, "It's Elder Hillyer." And she said, "I knew that our Heavenly Father was looking after us."
And you got your picture in the paper?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Right up. You even got a letter from the president of the mission.
Yes, I remember
President
that
Fisher?
too, yeah.
Glenn Fisher.
Yeah.
I have all the pictures and
They
the
wanted-
letters in the bottom drawer of the chiffonier.
They wanted me to write a story on it to put in the era. But I never did get around to that. But what was I going to say though? Oh yes, one thing that I remember was going. What was it? It was from the press conference, and maybe I think it was going to Bill Grant's home, and we went in a car. It was a reporter's car, and I said, "Well, I really should let my wife know where I am," and so they phoned Louise from the car, and I talked to Mother as we were traveling through Marpole and out onto Granville to go to this party thing there. And that was quite an experience for me to be able to talk to Mother while I was traveling in the car. Although after that I talked to Mother from the aircraft. One time we were on a search up in the Queen Charlotte's, and